At 6:14 on Monday morning, my sister stood barefoot in our kitchen and watched me drink the tea she had made. The mug was blue ceramic with a chip near the handle. Steam touched my upper lip. The tea smelled like lemon peel and licorice root. The last time I drank it, my throat began to tighten before noon. By 3 that afternoon, I could barely speak above a whisper. By Friday, my audition for the Bellwether Conservatory was gone. 3 months later, I found out Mara had not only made the tea, she had called the conservatory pretending to be me and withdrawn my application before I ever reached the building. That happened in my first life. In that life, I spent 2 years believing one ruined audition had ended my career. I took office jobs. I stopped singing in public. I avoided the black rehearsal folder on the top shelf of my closet because looking at it made my chest hurt. Mara got the place I had wanted. She became the family success story. Then, on a wet November evening, I stepped off a curb while staring at an email from Bellwether. The email said their former admissions assistant had uncovered irregularities in my file. They wanted to speak with me about a withdrawal call placed from an unknown woman. I saw the white delivery van too late. When I opened my eyes again, the blue mug was in my hands. Mara leaned against the counter. She was 26 again. Her dark hair was twisted into the loose knot she wore when she wanted to look as if she had just wandered into a room. A thin silver chain rested against her collarbone. She watched the mug instead of watching me. She said, "Drink it while it is warm. The herbs are supposed to protect your voice." My pulse struck once, hard, beneath my jaw. Then it steadied. I had spent 18 years training my breathing. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. A singer learns quickly that panic steals air before it steals anything else. I set the mug beside the sink. I said, "I need to warm up first." Mara smiled. She said, "Of course you do." The microwave clock changed to 6:15. I knew exactly where I was. I knew the date, Monday, March 8th, 4 days before the Bellwether final audition. I also knew what Mara would do next. At 7:02, she would ask whether my accompanist had confirmed. At 7:40, while I showered, she would photograph the access code printed inside my audition packet. On Tuesday, she would use that code to change the contact number on my application. On Wednesday at 4:18, she would call Bellwether from the landline in our father's old study. She would tell the admissions assistant that I had developed vocal nodules and needed to withdraw. On Friday, I would arrive at the east entrance in a navy dress and be told my name was no longer on the list. That was how it happened before. This time, I poured the tea into the sink after Mara went upstairs. A pale thread of powder clung to the bottom of the mug. I rinsed it away, dried the cup, and returned it to the cabinet. Then I went into our father's study. The room smelled of cedar, dust, and peppermint. Dad had died 14 months earlier, leaving the house equally to both of us. Mara and I had moved back in to sort his things. We were still there, because grief made every decision feel permanent. On the desk sat his old telephone recorder. It was a flat gray box, 11 inches wide, with 2 cassette wells and a red light above the word record. Dad had been a speech therapist. Before digital files became standard, he recorded practice calls for clients who stuttered under pressure. Even after he retired, he used the machine to record interviews for a local history group. The first time around, I had forgotten it existed. So had Mara. I opened the lower drawer. 3 blank microcassettes lay in a paper sleeve beneath a stack of tax envelopes. I inserted one, pressed record, and lifted the receiver. The reels began to turn. I called the automated weather line. A calm voice announced low clouds and an afternoon temperature of 52 degrees. When I hung up, the reels stopped. When I lifted the receiver again, they moved. The recorder was working. I rewound the tape and played back the weather report. The sound was thin but clear. Then I replaced the cassette with a fresh one and closed the drawer without taking the recorder from the desk. Foreknowledge did not make me fearless. It made fear specific. I knew which door would open. I knew the minute. I knew what Mara would say. For the first time, I also knew where the proof would be. Mara and I had been compared from the day she first sang harmony over my melody in the back seat of Dad's car. I was 9, she was 7. Our mother turned around from the passenger seat and said Mara had found the third without being shown. That became the family story. Mara was instinct. I was effort. She could hear a song once and repeat it. I wrote intervals on index cards and practiced them until the corners softened. She sang with her eyes closed. I marked breaths in pencil. She forgot lyrics but made audiences forgive her. I remembered every word and was praised for being dependable. None of that bothered me when we were children. I loved singing with her. We stood on overturned milk crates in the garage and performed for Dad while he repaired furniture. At Christmas, we sang the same 2-part carol until our mother asked us to give the neighbors a rest. The difference began to matter when adults turned our voices into a contest. Bellwether was supposed to be different. The conservatory occupied a converted textile mill in Norwin. Its performance fellowship accepted 6 singers each year. Fellows received coaching, housing, a monthly stipend, and 9 months to develop a showcase with working directors. I had prepared for the audition for 11 months. My anchor was not natural brilliance, it was preparation. I trained before work and logged every session. I knew which vowel narrowed when I was dehydrated. I knew my middle register warmed more evenly after 14 minutes of lip trills. I had selected 3 pieces that showed range without pretending I was a different singer. I had paid an arranger named Corin Hale to create clean piano reductions. I kept 1 set in my rehearsal folder, 1 in the car, and 1 in a sealed envelope at my voice teacher's studio. Mara applied 2 weeks before the deadline and told me over dinner as if the thought had just occurred to her. In my first life, I believed her when she said it could be fun if we both got in. After Rebirth, I understood that she needed to win in a way that put me back in my assigned place. At 7:02, just as I remembered, Mara entered the front room while I was doing breathing exercises. She asked whether Corin had confirmed for Friday. I said, yes. She picked lint from the arm of the sofa. She said, I heard Bellwether can be strict about accompanists. It would be awful to lose your slot over paperwork. I said, it would. She waited for more. I gave her nothing. At 7:31, I took my audition packet upstairs. I removed the original access card and replaced it with a copy I had made in my first life for my voice teacher. The code on that old copy had expired after the preliminary round. I left it inside the folder where Mara expected to find it. Then I carried the real card downstairs in the lining of my coat. At 7:40, the pipes shuddered when I turned on the shower. I stood beside the tub without getting in. Through the floor, I heard Mara's bedroom door open. 11 seconds later, the 3rd stair creaked. She moved quietly through the hall. My room door gave a faint click. I watched the second hand travel around the waterproof clock above the sink. She stayed in my room for 1 minute and 43 seconds. Then the stair creaked again. I waited another minute before turning off the shower. The packet was exactly where I had left it. The flap was closed. The access card was tucked beneath the schedule with its expired code facing down. Mara had taken the bait. My hands trembled when I buttoned my blouse. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the same grief I had felt when I learned the truth years later. It was simply arriving early this time. At 8:20, I drove to the Norwin Public Library and used a computer on the 2nd floor. I changed the password on my Bellwether application. I replaced Mara's number with a prepaid number I bought at the pharmacy. I added a verification phrase to the account. The phrase was Cedar Metronome. Only I knew why. Then I emailed the admissions office. I said I had reason to believe someone might attempt to alter or withdraw my application. I asked them to require the verification phrase for any telephone change. The admissions coordinator, a woman named Celine Ward, replied at 9:06. She thanked me for the warning and noted the phrase on my file. I printed the email and folded it into quarters. At 10:30, I met Corin in rehearsal room 4 at the Larkspur Arts Annex. The room had a black upright piano, 2 cracked music stands, and a radiator that clicked every 40 seconds. Corin was 53, precise, and unmoved by drama. That was why I trusted him. I told him someone might try to interfere with the audition. He stopped arranging his pencils by length. He asked whether I wanted him to call the conservatory. I said, not yet. I asked him to bring a second copy of the music and arrive through the west entrance at 1:15 on Friday. My official call time was 2:10. Corin studied my face. He said, "You look as if you have already lived through this." I said, "I have." He did not ask what I meant. We rehearsed for 90 minutes. My voice was clear. The note at the top of the second piece settled exactly where it should. I recorded the session on my phone, labeled the file March 8th baseline, and uploaded it to 2 separate folders. Preparation had once been the trait my family used to make me smaller. Mara was gifted. I was careful. Mara was fearless. I was rigid. In my second life, careful felt like a door with a lock on my side. That evening, Mara cooked pasta with browned butter and sage. She moved around the kitchen humming one of my audition pieces. It was the piece she always claimed not to like. She asked why I had not finished the tea. I said it tasted bitter. She sprinkled cheese over her bowl. She said, "Nerves can change your sense of taste." I watched her turn the grater against the light. I asked if she was nervous about her own audition. She said, "Not really. One of us has to stay calm." The sentence had sounded affectionate in my first life. Now I heard the edge she had hidden inside it. On Tuesday morning, Mara tried the expired access code. At 9:12, my prepaid phone received a security notice from Bellwether. At 9:14, another notice arrived. At 9:17, the account locked for 15 minutes. Mara was in the front room with her laptop. I could see the glow of the screen on her face. She closed it when I entered. That afternoon, I called Celine. I gave her the verification phrase and confirmed my call time. She told me there had been 3 failed login attempts. I asked her not to block the account entirely. I said I wanted a record of any further attempt. There was a pause. Then Celine said she understood. In my first life, Celine had shown me the withdrawal note in my file. Caller reports vocal nodules, does not wish to reschedule. On Wednesday, rain began before dawn. I woke at 5:38 and listened to it tap against the gutter. For several seconds, I was afraid Rebirth had been a dream. Then I saw the navy dress hanging from the closet door and the real access card beneath my water bottle. The day was exactly as I remembered. At breakfast, Mara wore Dad's green cardigan. She rubbed her throat and said she might skip her afternoon rehearsal. In the first life, I had offered her my rehearsal room. This time, I said, rest would probably help. At 11:45, I moved the telephone recorder from the surface of Dad's desk to the shelf beneath it. I did not conceal it. I only made room for Mara to sit comfortably. The fresh cassette was inside. The machine was connected to the landline through the same beige cable Dad had used for years. I tested it once more by calling the time service. Then I rewound the cassette to the beginning and left the study door open. At 12:20, I told Mara I was meeting Corin and would be gone until 6. She stood at the sink washing an already clean spoon. She said, "Do not strain yourself." I drove away at 12:31. At 12:44, I parked on the next street behind a delivery truck. From there, I could see the top half of our front door between two bare maple trees. I waited. The rain turned fine and silver against the windshield. At 3:56, the porch light came on. At 4:11, Mara entered Dad's study. I could not see her. I did not need to. At 4:18, exactly as before, my prepaid phone rang. The caller identification showed Bellwether Conservatory. I answered on the second ring. Celine asked for Nessa Vale. I said, "This is Nessa." She asked for the verification phrase. I said, "Cedar metronome." Celine's voice changed. She said someone was on another line claiming to be me. The caller had said I was medically unable to sing and wanted to withdraw immediately. I looked through the rain at our house. I said, "Please keep her talking long enough to document the call. Do not tell her you have reached me." Celine said she could not record the call without following conservatory procedure, but she could create a detailed note and notify the fellowship director. I said, "That is enough." It was not the only recording being made. The call ended at 4:22. At 4:27, Mara left the study. She stood in the front window with her phone in one hand. Then she drew the curtain. I drove to the Larkspur Annex and rehearsed with Corin as planned. My breath was shallow for the first 10 minutes. I could feel anger pulling my sound backward, making it hard. Corin played the opening chord and stopped. He said, "Whatever happened, leave it outside the phrase." I closed my eyes. I thought of Dad tapping a pencil against the piano. He used to say that a breath was not a feeling, it was a physical choice. I set my feet beneath my hips. I let my ribs open. I sang the first line again. This time the sound moved forward. When I returned home at 6:09, Mara was on the sofa under a gray blanket. A bowl of soup sat untouched on the coffee table. She asked how rehearsal went. I said, "Clean." She nodded. She said, "Good. You deserve one clean week after all the work you did." I looked at her for a long moment. In my first life, those words had comforted me. Now I knew she had spoken them less than 2 hours after trying to erase my name. I went upstairs without answering. At 11:36, after Mara's bedroom light went dark, I entered Dad's study. The cassette had reached the middle of side A. I pressed stop. My thumb left a damp mark on the plastic button. I rewound it. At first, there was only room noise, rain in the gutter, the old clock above the bookcase, Mara setting the receiver down and picking it up again. Then I heard her dial. Her voice was lower than usual when she gave my name. She said she was Nessa Vale and needed to withdraw from Friday's audition. She said a specialist had found nodules on her vocal cords. She said she was embarrassed and did not want anyone calling back. Celine asked for the access code. Mara read the expired number from the card she had photographed. Celine said the code was invalid and asked whether she could verify the mailing address. Mara did. Then Celine asked whether she could place her on hold. Mara said yes. For 28 seconds, there was silence. Then Mara whispered to herself. She said, "Come on, just take her off the list." The words were quiet, but the recorder caught them. Celine returned and said she would need a verification phrase. Mara breathed out sharply. She said she had never been given one. She said this was exactly why she was withdrawing. She was under medical stress and did not have time for administrative games. Celine told her the request could not be completed without verification. Mara asked whether the audition slot would remain open if she failed to appear. Celine said the panel would mark the candidate absent after 10 minutes. Mara said, "Fine, that works too." The line clicked dead. The recorder kept running. That was the part Mara had forgotten. She had forgotten Dad's machine did not stop until the receiver returned fully to its cradle. The left side of the cradle had stuck for years. Dad used to press it twice with his thumb. Mara did not. For another minute and 12 seconds, the recorder captured the room. It caught her pacing. It caught the scrape of Dad's chair. Then it caught her calling our mother on her mobile phone and putting the call on speaker. Mara said, "It did not go through, but she still will not sing on Friday." Our mother asked what she had done. Mara said, "The tea should be enough. If it is not, I switched the address in Corin's confirmation email. He will go to the old campus." Nessa falls apart when plans change. She always has. Our mother was silent. Then she said, "Mara, this has gone too far." Mara answered with the sentence I had waited years to understand. She said, "You told me Bellwether was my chance." I cannot be her younger sister in there too. Our mother said she had meant Mara should focus on her own audition. Mara said, "Focusing is not enough when Nessa has spent a year making herself impossible to ignore." The call ended. I sat in Dad's chair with both hands flat on the desk. The study was cold. Rainwater ticked inside the downpipe. The cassette reels continued to turn until I pressed stop. In my first life, I had believed the tea caused everything. I had never known about Corin's email, because he did reach the old campus, then blamed himself for confusing the address. I had never known our mother had heard the truth before the audition. I had called her from the east entrance that Friday. I had been hoarse and crying. She had told me some chances were not meant for us. She already knew why mine was gone. The betrayal widened without becoming louder. I did not cry in the study. I removed the cassette and placed it in a clear plastic case. I inserted a second cassette and copied the recording onto it. Then I connected Dad's old digital converter, the one he used for the history interviews, and transferred the audio to my laptop. The waveform appeared as a thin blue line. At 12:18, I saved 3 copies. At 12:24, I emailed one to myself. At 12:31, I sent one to Celine with a plain note. I said the attached audio documented the attempted withdrawal and an additional plan to misdirect my accompanist. I asked that it be reviewed before Friday. I did not send it to Mara. I did not send it to our mother. I did not need their confession. I already had their voices. At breakfast on Thursday, Mara watched me eat oatmeal and sliced pear. She asked whether my throat felt dry. I said no. She asked whether Corin was ready. I said yes. For the first time, uncertainty moved across her face. She reached for the kettle and asked if I wanted tea. I said no. The answer was small. It changed the room. Mara set the kettle down. She said, "You have been strange all week." I said, "I have been paying attention." She looked at me then, really looked. For a moment, I thought she understood everything. Then she smiled and said, "I always became intense before auditions." At 9:40, Celine called. She had listened to the recording with the fellowship director, Tomas Venn. They had also reviewed the failed account access and the withdrawal note from Wednesday. Celine said my audition was secure. She asked me to arrive at 12:45 instead of 2:10 and report to the West Desk. She said they wanted to speak with me before the panel began. I asked whether Mara's audition would proceed. Celine said the director had not made a final decision. I said, "I am not asking you to cancel it because she is my sister. I only need my own place protected." Celine said she understood. That mattered to me. I did not want Mara removed so I could feel powerful. I wanted the door she had tried to close returned to its proper position. What happened to her after that belonged to the choices recorded in her own voice. At noon, Corin confirmed that he had received 2 emails. One directed him to the abandoned Brindle Street campus. The newer one, sent after my warning, showed the correct west entrance. I asked him to bring both. That evening I packed my bag on the dining table, while Mara rehearsed upstairs. I packed the navy dress, black shoes, sealed lozenges, both copies of the music, Celine's email, and the active access card. Last, I packed Dad's microcassette. The label read, March 10th, 4:18 p.m. I wrote the time twice, so my hand would not shake. Mara came downstairs at 8:06 wearing a robe. She saw the cassette beside my bag. Her eyes paused on it. She asked why I was taking one of Dad's tapes. I said, "I like having a record." She stared at the label, but the plastic case was turned so she could not see the date. Then she opened the refrigerator and asked if I had used the last lemon. I said no. She did not ask about the cassette again. I slept for 5 hours and 42 minutes. At 5:50 on Friday morning, I woke before my alarm. The house was silent. A faint bar of streetlight lay across the ceiling. In my first life, I had woken with a swollen throat and a metallic taste in my mouth. I had spent the morning steaming my voice, canceling Corin, and telling myself I could sing without an accompanist if I had to. In my second life, I drank 6 ounces of water and began my warm-up. The first hum vibrated cleanly behind my lips. At 6:20, Mara knocked on my door. She was already dressed for her audition in a cream blouse and charcoal trousers. She said she had received a strange email from Bellwether. Her call time had been moved from 11:30 to 3 o'clock. I said, "Mine changed too." She asked what time. I said, "I am leaving at noon." That was true, but not complete. She stood in the doorway. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the frame. She said, "I thought Corin was meeting you at Brindle Street." There it was. She had never been part of my correspondence with Corin. She should not have known the false address. I folded a scarf and placed it in my bag. I said, "Why did you think that?" Mara's expression changed by less than an inch. She said she must have heard me mention it. I said I never did. For 6 seconds, neither of us moved. Then Mara said I was making her nervous. I closed the bag. I said, "You should focus on your own audition." They were almost the same words our mother had used on the recording. Mara left without answering. At 11:58, I carried my bag to the car. She watched from the upstairs window. The drive to Bellwether took 27 minutes. The converted mill rose beside the river, 5 stories of red brick and narrow black windows. A metal sign by the gate showed a silver bell over a line of water. I parked on Foundry Lane. Corin was waiting at the west entrance in a brown coat, holding the black folio that contained our music. He checked his watch when he saw me. It was 12:31. He said, "Early." I said deliberately. Inside, the lobby smelled of floor polish, coffee, and damp wool. 6 candidates sat along one wall. Some mouthed lyrics. One stretched her jaw with 2 fingers. A pianist played broken chords behind a closed door. In my first life, I had entered through the east doors at 2:04. I remembered the pressure in my throat, the empty space beside my name on the check-in sheet, and the way Mara stepped out of the audition room while I was still trying to explain myself. Now my name appeared on the west desk in black ink. Nessa Vale, 120, confirmed. The receptionist handed me a green badge and asked me to wait in interview room B. Corin sat beside me. He did not ask about the cassette case in my hand. At 12:47, Celine entered with Tomas Venn and a woman named Orla Dane, the conservatory's program administrator. Tomas was narrow-faced, silver-haired, and wearing a tie the color of wet slate. Orla carried a printed transcript of the recording. They closed the door. Tomas said they had reviewed the audio. He asked whether I had the original. I placed the clear case on the table. I said yes. Orla examined the label. She asked how the call had been recorded. I explained Dad's machine. I explained that it was connected to the household landline and activated whenever the receiver was lifted. I told them the room, the date, and the exact time. I did not embellish anything. Then Tomas asked the question I had feared since waking on Monday. He asked whether I had arranged for Mara to make the call so I could record her. I said no. I knew she might interfere. I protected my account and left the existing recorder connected. The call and every word on it were her choices. He asked how I knew. I could not tell him I had lived through the week before. I said Mara and I had a long history of competition, and details around my application had begun changing without my consent. It was the closest answer I could give without lying. Celine placed the failed login report beside the transcript. Corin added the 2 contradictory address emails. The false message had been sent through a temporary account designed to resemble his. Orla said the conservatory could not determine every detail in that room, but the attempted impersonation was clear. Tomas folded his hands. He said my audition would proceed, Mara's would not. The conservatory would document the conduct and retain the materials in case she disputed the decision. The consequence landed quietly. I felt no rush of satisfaction. I saw Mara at 7, singing harmony in the back seat. I saw her at 14, shocked when adults turned toward her. I saw every year she had been taught that love arrived through comparison. Then I saw her hand lifting the landline receiver. Both things were true. Tomas asked whether I needed time before the audition. I said, 15 minutes. He nodded. At 1:02, I entered warm-up room 3 with Corin. The room had a tall window facing the river. Barges moved below like dark, patient shapes. I removed my coat and rolled my shoulders. My body felt heavier than it had that morning. Corin played a 5-note scale. I sang it. The first note wavered. He played it again. I thought of the cassette on the interview table. Proof had gotten me through the door. It could not sing for me. That part was still mine. I planted both feet. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. The second scale was steady. At 1:18, a stage assistant led us through a black corridor. The audition hall had 180 seats, all empty except for 4 panelists in the 6th row. A work light shone above them. Dust drifted through its beam. On stage, the piano lid was raised. A strip of white tape marked the place where I should stand. I walked to it. In my first life, I had imagined this walk so often that losing it felt like losing a memory. Now my shoes touched the actual boards. The floor gave slightly beneath my left heel. The air smelled of old curtains and warm electrical cables. Tomas sat at the end of the panel table. His expression revealed nothing. He asked me to begin when ready. Corin placed the music on the piano. I looked once at the empty balcony. Then I nodded. The opening chord entered the hall. I sang. The first piece was controlled and spare. The second required movement. I crossed the stage on the musical turn we had rehearsed and let my body remember every hour of work. For the final piece, the panel asked for the passage Mara had hummed in the kitchen. In another life, hearing her voice in my head might have tightened mine. This time, I heard only the pitch. Corin gave me the chord. I took the breath Dad had taught me to take. The phrase rose. It crossed the break without catching. It opened at the top and returned cleanly to the center. When it ended, no one spoke for 3 seconds. Then one of the panelists asked me to sing it again, with less weight on the first line. I did. The second version was better. At 1:43, the stage assistant let us out. My audition had lasted 23 minutes. I stood in the corridor with my hand against the cool brick wall. Corin closed his folio. He said, "That was the work." I knew what he meant. The recording had restored my name. The performance had made it belong there. We returned to the west lobby at 1:51. Mara was standing beside the reception desk. She must have come early after her call time changed. Her cream blouse was damp at the shoulders from the rain. She held her audition folder against her chest. Orla stood across from her. Neither woman was raising her voice. Mara looked at the green badge on my dress, then at Corin, then at the black corridor behind us. She understood. She asked whether I had already auditioned. I said, yes. She asked how. Orla told her they needed to continue their conversation in private. Mara did not move. She looked directly at me and asked what I had told them. I said, "I brought the recording you forgot." Her face emptied. It was not a dramatic collapse. Her mouth opened slightly. Her grip loosened on the folder. One corner struck the floor. She asked, "What recording?" I said, "Dad's telephone recorder. Wednesday at 4:18. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the lobby seemed to hold every version of us. 2 girls harmonizing in a garage, 2 women sorting a dead father's house, 1 sister lifting a receiver, the other arriving with the tape. Mara said, "You knew." I said, "Enough to protect myself." She said she had only wanted one chance that did not begin with people measuring her against me. The words were human. That made them hurt more. I said, "You had your own audition. You tried to remove mine." She looked at Corin and then at Orla. She said she had panicked. She said our mother had spent years telling her Bellwether was the kind of place that could change everything. She said she could not bear to enter another room where I had already done the preparation, learned the names, and made myself dependable. I listened. Then I said, "My preparation was never something you had to survive." Mara's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Orla asked her to come into the office. Mara bent, picked up her folder, and followed. That was the last time I saw her inside Bellwether. I did not wait for the office door to reopen. Corin and I left through the west entrance. Rain dotted the stone steps. A food cart across the lane was selling coffee and hot rolls. I bought 2 coffees, though I could only drink half of mine. We stood beneath the mill's iron awning. At 2:16, my mother called. I let the phone ring until it stopped. At 2:19, she called again. I answered. She said Mara had told her about the recording. She asked whether I understood what disqualification could do to Mara's confidence. The question was so familiar that I could have answered it in my sleep. I said, "Did you understand what withdrawal would do to mine?" My mother was silent. I could hear a cupboard closing in her kitchen. Then she said, "I told her not to go through with it." I said, "You knew before I called you from Bellwether the first time." The words escaped before I could stop them. She asked what I meant by the first time. I looked at the river. A barge moved beneath the bridge, leaving a V of dark water behind it. I said, "You knew before today. That is enough." She said families sometimes survive by not turning every mistake into a permanent judgment. I said, "I am not judging her. I am no longer absorbing the result for her." My mother asked if I would come to dinner on Sunday so we could talk together. I said, "No." She asked when I would be ready. I said, "I do not know." Then I ended the call. At 2:28, Corin lifted his coffee and said he was going home before anyone else's family called him. I almost laughed. It was the first light thing I had felt all week. Bellwether sent the decision on Monday at 10:03. I opened the email in Dad's study. The fellowship committee offered me one of the 6 places. Orientation would begin June 1. Housing was included in a renovated building across the river. I had 7 days to accept. I read the message twice. Then I printed it on Dad's old printer. The page came out warm and slightly curled. I accepted at 10:17. Mara had been staying with our mother since Friday. She returned that evening for clothes. I was packing books into 2 boxes marked Bellwether. She stood in the doorway of Dad's study. She looked tired. Without makeup, the skin beneath her eyes was faintly purple. She asked whether I got in. I said yes. She nodded once. The conservatory had barred her from applying again for 2 years. They had not contacted the police. They had documented the impersonation internally and refunded her audition fee. Those consequences came from their process, not from any demand I made. Mara said she had started seeing a counselor through our mother's workplace plan. I said, good. She asked whether I had sent the recording to anyone else. I said no. She leaned against the doorframe. She said, you could ruin me with it. I said, I needed it to stop you. I do not need it to keep hurting you. Her face tightened. She said, I do not know if that makes me feel better. I said, it was not meant to. We stood there with Dad's books between us. Mara looked at the recorder on the shelf. She said she remembered him pressing the cradle twice. I said, so do I. She asked if I hated her. I considered giving the easy answer. I considered saying no because she was my sister. I considered saying yes because the word would end the conversation. Instead, I said, I do not trust you. That is the part I know. She lowered her head. Then she said, I am sorry. It was the first apology she offered without explaining herself afterward. I believed she meant it in that moment. I also knew an apology could be sincere and still arrive too late to restore access. I picked up the box nearest my feet. Mara moved aside so I could pass. Over the next 6 weeks, a property manager helped us divide and sell the house. Mara chose several pieces of Dad's furniture. I took his books, the upright piano, and the telephone recorder. I told my mother I needed distance and would contact her when that changed. Mara sent no messages for almost a month. Then, on the morning I moved into Bellwether housing, she sent a photograph of the blue mug. It sat inside an open donation box with 4 other cups. Her message said, I should have thrown it away sooner. I did not answer immediately. I carried the last box into my new room. The apartment was small. One window faced the river. A radiator ran beneath it, even though the day was warm. Somewhere below, a violinist played the same 8 measures over and over. I unpacked my music first. The black rehearsal folder went on the desk. The original access card went into the back pocket. I no longer needed it, but I kept it because the printed name was mine and because I had walked through the door attached to it. I placed Dad's recorder on the lowest shelf. The cassette from March 10th remained in its clear case. I had not listened to it since the audition. I did not need to hear Mara's voice again to remember what happened. At 6:14 that evening, I opened the window. River air entered the room. It smelled of rain, stone, and the coffee roaster across Foundry Lane. The violin below stopped, started again, and finally carried the phrase past the place where it had broken. I turned Mara's photograph face down on the desk. Then I took the audition recording from my bag, not the telephone tape, the clean recording Corin had made from the back row of the hall. I pressed play. My own voice filled the small room. It crossed the break. It rose into the last phrase. It did not sound fearless. It sounded prepared. On the shelf, Dad's gray recorder sat silent, its red light dark. I let it stay that way.